So I'm going to be talking about Maya, which is a trial of the supportive landlord model to see how we could go at housing and keeping housed people who experience long-term rough sleeping and chronic homelessness. It grew out of the Mental Health Commission funded independent living program. And last year we did a pilot down in Bunbury with 8 properties to see how it would work in the homelessness space. And from that, been lucky enough to do now a 2-year trial, which is the 100 properties that people have been talking about. Lots of money from government, 20.7 million, very exciting, because they're going to be purchasing half of those properties and then they're layering a supportive landlord subsidy across all of them. So it's got lots and lots of different moving parts. So because I'm conscious at the end of the day, we have nice, pretty pictures of Lego to keep you going. So we're going to talk about the people we're trying to house, the houses and where they come from, how we do the supportive landlord bit, the tenancy bit management, and how we work with other services. So to start off with, let's talk about the people. This is not the droid you were looking for. This little character, until Luke came along and ruined his day by smashing up the Death Star, had a job and a tenancy and was actually doing fine. And despite the fact that he's got a drink in his hand, if we could get him a house tomorrow, he'd probably be okay. He knows how to manage a tenancy. So in Homelessness Week, in a housing crisis, absolutely, we should be doing something about housing this chap. And we should definitely be supporting anything that's increasing social and affordable housing. But I'm going to be talking about the supportive landlord model, which is where we're layering in an extra level of oversight and input and collaboration around that. So we're aiming to house those people who, without that, would probably not be able to manage their tenancy and would therefore return to homelessness. So these are the droids we're looking for. The supportive landlord model is specifically designed for people experiencing complex issues and who's had a long time out in the cold in homelessness and rough sleeping. It came up, as I said, out of that mental health program, the independent living program, which is specifically looking at supporting people who have really long-term and challenging mental health issues. And Emma, in her talk, talked about trying to build on things that work. That program is long-standing, and like most long-standing programs that have done quite a lot of program drift over the years, what's interesting is that what the community housing sectors did with that drift. They took the time to actually work out what it should look like, what it does look like, to document and articulate that into a really concrete model that says, this is what we're doing and this is how we're doing it differently. So that when we went to government and said, hey, this worked in mental health, we think it'll work in homelessness, they're able to go, that's based on some evidence, that looks really well, it's really well documented. So what do we know about this particular group of people? They experience really serious mental health issues. I know when I was working on the 50 Lives project, which is the same sort of cohort, about 80 or 90% experienced really serious mental health challenges. They have lots of physical challenges. I'm really not sure what's wrong with Squidward, but he should see a doctor sometime soon, and probably hasn't because he's been sleeping rough for quite a long time. They experience lots of additional violence that other people do and the consequent trauma and health challenges that come part of that. Extra drug and alcohol stuff, a lot more than the general cohort. And then lots of stigma and discrimination as a result of those experiences. So basically everything you could possibly imagine that means they're not going to be particularly great tenants. However, what we know from Housing First is that if you house people and let them have a stable home, that sounds like a horrible way of saying that, support them to have a stable home with the wraparound services around them in that sort of Housing First style, we know that you get really good outcomes. And there's lots of national and international studies that show that. A lot of those Housing First principles and the work around Housing First has, however, whilst it says, yes, we need houses, it's focused quite a lot on how you do support services differently. What interests me about the supportive landlord model is it shows us how housing providers can work differently and how housing providers can align to those housing first principles to get those really good outcomes. So that's the people we're trying to house. Houses. We've been doing lots of talk about houses today, and how difficult they are and how tricky they're to come by and how are we going to do it and where they're coming from. So where are we getting our houses from? The department, obviously demonstrated by the man in the left on a suit, despite the fact that he's in fact a woman called Lara, is out there purchasing 50 properties in the department for us, and we'll be head leasing those from them. Housing Choices, obviously the more funky person in a red shirt, despite being a woman called Amy. We're purchasing 23 properties with the help from a very generous philanthropic low interest-free loan. And then we're bringing 27 of our existing properties into that program, 8 of which came from that early pilot. So all up, that's where 100 properties come from. And the first thing you're doing when you're thinking, we've got to buy all these properties, we've got to do all this stuff, and they've got to be across multiple regions, is to try and work out, so how are we going to do that in a way that means that we can work together, that we're not competing for the same properties and we get the right type of properties. So one of the nice pieces of work that came out of this that's going to be useful moving forward is the purchasing partnership guidelines that we did with the Department of Communities around what type of properties, how we're going to do that and how we're going to purchase together. Because not all properties are created equal. We definitely are trying to avoid the high density properties because we know that that causes lots of issues with neighbourhood and noise. Quite challenging when you're trying to also buy 1-bedroom properties to avoid high density. We're trying to avoid properties that are too old. So we're not trying to avoid things that have, lots of maintenance issues, either to get them up and running or in the long term. Definitely trying to avoid things that are too isolated, even though further out you go, the cheaper they go. But definitely people need access to services, so we're very mindful of that. Also mindful of, we're on a budget. We cannot afford the palace and everything fantastic. And then on top of that, there's also safety issues and all these sorts of other things. That means somewhere in the middle of a housing crisis, we're trying to find houses that are just right, or several different types of just right, because different people need different houses. This has taken a lot more than we thought. It's actually quite tricky, but the joy of it is that we've been learning things. We've been learning things about, the department's been learning from us about why we want particular types of properties and why particular properties aren't suitable for this cohort, which does make them sometimes think, oh, but we're buying that sort of house for ourselves. So hopefully there's a bit of learning going on in that space. And you might think this is the dullest slide in the planet, but this is the most exciting slide in the planet if you ask our property manager, Chantel, because the other thing that we've learned from the department is they taught us how to change our service providers are going to find this very dull. Housing providers, you're just going to be leaping in joy. How to keep over-spec items like air conditioners and dishwashers in properties so people can enjoy them. So fantastic. We've also learnt a bit from the WA Alliance, who've been contributing all that fabulous work that they're doing to help keep us on track to this is the profile, these are the type of houses and the type of size that we need. So people, houses, tenancy management. So how are we doing? And this is where the supportive landlord model really, the rubber hits the road, because it's about using those aspects that are unique to what a landlord, particularly a community housing provider, can do to be able to sustain houses, but also having that subsidy which enables us to do more and to manage more complex challenges. So the first bit is about using the ongoing presence that we have as a landlord. And what we mean by that is support services are amazing. You do fantastic work, but you do exit people from services. And you do, if someone says, you're not allowed to come to my house, don't knock on my door, you don't go. We will always go to someone's house. And in a supportive landlord model, we will go in that front door every 3 months to see what is going on. So it's that ongoing presence, and it doesn't stop. We're always going in. And when we're going in, we're looking as a tenancy manager at, are people, paying the rent and manage their bills? How are their property standards going? How's their relationship with their neighbours going? They're the stuff we're always alert to in terms of managing tenancies. They're also the things that mean you can actually see if someone's support needs are on the increase or things are re-emerging. So the whole point of the supportive landlord model is to act as that canary in the mine, to be able to go, we need to get support back in now. We can see what's going on, so that when support services quite understandably go off to work with someone else who needs it, we can call them back as things re-emerge. We use the subsidy that comes with a supportive landlord model to absorb a higher level of commercial risk. So that might be a little bit of, overlooking a little bit of rent here, helping patch up a little bit of damage, but also using the entire portfolio to actually spread that risk across that. So I think last year it wasn't a supportive landlord property, but we had one property that had 60 grand's worth of damage to it when someone moved out. You can't manage that for one, but if you spread it across 100, you can actually absorb that risk a bit more, so that we can, be brave, take in people who don't look housing ready, because we know we've got support services to work with and we've got that capacity to absorb a bit higher risk. We do extra training with the team. So the team that works specifically on the supportive landlord model will do training in trauma-informed practice. They'll do training in mental health. They'll work on the mental housing first principles. Their managers actually are homeless and mental health specialists, so does, reflective practice with them. So they get a little bit more training to actually not just be tenancy managers, but to actually be mindful of all that other stuff that's going on around people. And then, of course, they also have more time. So our staff in this program have half the portfolio size of our general tenancies. So that means that they can spend more time on the phone negotiating with neighbours about neighbourhood conflict. They can spend more time with a person trying to sort out, getting their rent paid and things like that. They can, do action plans to try and get their property standards together. They can go to case conferences with support services and all of that stuff. And finally, they're also quite proactive about that. So rather than just waiting for tenancy issues to occur, we do tenancy support planning with people, which means that each year we'll sit down with them and go, right, how's your tenancy managing? What's the issues? What do you want us to do if you're feeling unwell? What support services are you connected to? What referrals might you like? And we have this spectacular tenancy engagement team that, connects them up with things in the community and all that sort of stuff. So all of those makes up the way that we as a housing provider work differently with that supportive landlord model layered over our properties. So houses, people, tenancy management. The final bit is about working with other services. So we've heard a lot today about collaboration and how collaboration is the key to ending homelessness. And we want to, do that more, and the more we do that, the smarter we work and things like that. So there's a lot of collaboration built into this supportive landlord model. And we actively go as a housing provider to those rough sleeper working groups and are part of that team and part of that solution. So part of that is about having a best fit, because not every stormtrooper is the same. Your man there might like a chicken coop instead, or a garden that you can pack around in. So the idea of that allocations is, rather than us sitting back in our ivory tower going, oh, here's a house, here's a person, bang. Or, the system is normal with the Department of Communities is, after 20 years, you've come to the top of the list, 3 days, decide now. With the properties coming up through this, we take to the table what we know about the property, what we know about the neighbourhood, and we listen to what the rough sleeper groups know about the person to try and get the right person in the right house, because that's half the battle in terms of trying to have a good home and a good tenancy. And then, of course, when things start going a bit pear-shaped, that's when we would re-engage support services. And so, again, in those rough sleeper working groups, because we've got those relationships with those support services, to be able to go, can we have some help here? some stuff's going on here. We'd really like to do that. And, we've been doing that for years in the independent living program, and often are left with, well, shall we ring his sister? Because everything else has, disappeared. Whereas we're really excited about working in these rough sleeper working groups where we're going to have more than just, some vague family connection, but these, interconnected services who are really committed to keeping people housed. So wouldn't be a presentation without graphs. This is taken from our dashboard that goes up each day. So we currently have 40 properties in the program. You probably heard the minister mention 58. So because the other 18 are currently in that gap between the offer has been accepted and we're trying to settle. So there'll be 58 that we know we've currently got, and we're going to try and get the rest of them. Got to the end of the year. It's on. What you'll notice with that little graph that the stormtroopers are sliding down, there's been this, sudden increase in going up there. That's because actually it takes a while to put this stuff together and to get houses on stream. And you can't just pop down the corner shop and buy a house, as I've discovered. And so what we're finding, and this is a really good learning for trying to replicate this sort of work, is that for every 10 properties we like the look of and try to put an offer in, we get one. Half of them we lose because they've already sold by the time we've got our offer in, and the others are for, a whole range of other reasons. And then this is the retention rates. So you can see that our retention rate is currently looking very healthy. Out of all the people that have been housed, we've had one person pass away, sadly, and one person move interstate. So the 29 tenancies we have encompass 55 people, which is, other children and partners and things like that. If you're wondering what the gap is between 40 and 29, it's 11 properties that are currently sat in allocations, because we've got the keys back and we're currently signing someone up to get into those properties. So all of this work is not about trying to, get turnover and get people move on. The idea of this is that people will be able to settle into these homes, and they'll just get into their back cave and become their best selves and move on. So we're expecting that the first year and the second year of this trial are going to be very different. This year is crazy, buying houses, allocating, going nuts. Next year it's going to be a lot more just people living in their homes and helping them stay in their homes, and that's going to be really fun. So finally, there are a lot more people out there. 100 sounds like a really big number, but it's actually not a big number when you think about it's across the metro and Peel and Bunbury. So it's just a drop in the ocean of all those people that need housing. Not everybody needs a supportive landlord model, but we could certainly do with more of this. And we're pretty excited that, only 6 months into a 2-year trial, the minister's already announced an expansion to the regions. We don't work in those regions, but we're really keen to work with whichever housing provider picks this up to share everything we've learned, show them the potholes, what works, what doesn't, and to help them along that journey. Questions? God. Does anyone have a question other than can we go home now? I appreciate it's been quite a long day. Many, many hours of hard work and Auntie Google.
For those online, that was a question about the slides.
Apparently, that's why they ended up being stormtroopers, because you can actually, there's lots of wallpapers of Lego stormtroopers doing all sorts of strange things.
I have a question.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a strange question. That dashboard and the way that you present your data is really amazing. Did you do that, or is that an external provider who set up that to track your data?
If you really want to know.
Yeah.
So that's Power BI. I did about 3/4 of it, and I paid my son in beer to help me with the really tricky bits.
Okay, maybe we'll get connected to your son.
Sadly, he's now moved to Canberra. So when it breaks, I panic. It's just because we've got our data in an Excel spreadsheet. We've got an aging client recording system that isn't quite fit and hard to manipulate. So we've got stuff in an Excel spreadsheet. Part of working really closely with the Office of Homelessness is, and being, you know, one of the minister's favourite projects is they want updates constantly. And so I have the Office of Homelessness on the phone, you know, a couple of times a week wanting data. The minister wants fortnightly updates. And so this was me going, oh, for God's sake, just look at it yourself. So we made that so that they can look at the data whenever they want to see where we're tracking.
It's fabulous.